Hi, intuitive viewers. Welcome to Let's Chat on Sunday. I'm so glad you're here. I am here with a returning guest to Intuitiview, but this is your first time, right, Georgia, on this particular show, right?
Yes, Kim. Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. And let me just tell a little bit about you. Georgia King is a licensed clinical social worker and has been working in the field of mental health and addiction for only over 15 years. And you have some really interesting and I think needed and special services you offer, and we're going to talk about that at the end. And I know you have a special deal for people in the month of December, so we'll talk about that as well. But I think this is the perfect time to talk to you and the perfect topic to talk with you about. So can you remind everyone, Georgia, your story in a nutshell and kind of your own spiritual path?
Well, in a nutshell, I was an alcoholic and I got sober a little over 30 years ago. And along that path, I found that I needed more and more uh, depth in my searching for healing. And so I ended up uh, along the road wanting to go to uh, social work school and become a counselor because I felt it was something very much needed. And so that's what I did, and here I am now.
And I know that you're very dedicated to people who have had addictions, trauma, things like that can really it can really be a tricky road to walk and to come out the other side of those things. And so I'm so grateful for you and for people like you that really understand that. And I think it says something too, that you have a different type of empathy because you've walked that road yourself. You know what it takes to come out the other side. And I think that is so, it must make people feel comfortable right away because there is no judgment, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
No judgment from this end.
Right. And I think that's so important, right? Because that is something you really can feel judged when you fall into addiction. And, I wanted to, our topic that I wanted to talk about today is authenticity, being your authentic self. It came up because in the beginning of the month for my club, I do a recorded spirit guided message, and it was all about returning to your authentic self. And so I thought this is something that is becoming very important for whatever reason, more so now than ever. And I kind of think that it has something to do with truth, that we're having a hard time with falsehoods and the different realities that we seem to be living in, with people that are standing right next to us but are seeing things in a completely different way. Do you think that there's something about why maybe that spirit is saying this is an important thing to look at now? It will be helpful.
Definitely, I do. And I think that's going to end up being the solution to all the conflict that we're seeing. So much of it is outward.
Right.
And what's important is for us to know where we're coming from within, and be
And
guided by that inner spirit.
right. That inner compass, right, that we all have, and
Mm.
we can get disconnected from it. You know, I wanted to ask you first, because I see a link. Do you see a link with addiction and people who feel they are unable to be their authentic self?
Well, the very act of being in addiction takes you away from being your authentic self. But the very nature of alcoholism and addiction is, it puts you into an altered reality. And that reality is, people can stay there and they can think that maybe they can move forward in life from that position, but often they find it very difficult to maintain their addiction and achieve what they want to in life.
Right. And
So,
um, I'm sure that you are aware of the show Intervention.
yes.
It deals with addiction.
Hmm.
So often, I find it so interesting that so often, because you meet the people when they're in full-blown addiction, and then you meet them when they're have completed recovery or they're in recovery. A couple of things that I have noticed is, one is that they tend to be very sensitive people. And when they're in the throes of their addiction, they're very insensitive. They're very they can be very selfish, self-centered,
Hmm.
and when they become sober and the real them kind of emerges, they're usually quite sensitive souls. And I do wonder if, and the other thing that I notice is that when they are uh, in recovery, they look so different. There's a glow. It's as if the spirit returns, or the spirit returns in a way that can be seen in a much more dramatic way. And but I've noticed that as well, because it's always astounding to me, even in their eyes, just the glow and the aliveness that's there. Again, it's so apparent to me that this is a complete transformation inside and out. Um, but do you think that there are some people who may be naturally sensitive and have used drugs or alcohol to dull kind of a harsh world, or a world that they find is hard to navigate because they are so sensitive?
Yes, I think that's why often younger people start drinking and smoking pot and other things to numb the reality of growing up, and the effects of that happen, like in junior high, for example, when puberty starts and you start to feel all these strange emotions, and it's not comfortable, and some people will choose to kind of numb that out to deal with it,
Right.
especially if they've had trauma in their earlier childhood, and don't have, a stable home, stable background.
And have you noticed that switch on the outside when they have a transformational experience inside? Have you noticed that glow that they
Oh,
seem to have?
yes, we call it the pink cloud.
The pink clouds.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And it's kind of it's like, I don't know, for me, um, as I've observed other people, it's almost like they're free at last. It's like a feeling of freedom
Right,
from the bondage of addiction,
right.
and it feels so wonderful. You're feeling again, which is great. And then the bad news is you're feeling again.
Right.
but especially in the beginning, it's such a wonderful feeling and such a welcome feeling after being isolated uh, in addiction for so long. For most people have been in addiction for a while before they decide to get sober. So, but
Right.
it,
Yeah.
it is this, it's like a spiritual awakening. It's like the truth is finally allowed to enter after years of denial.
Yeah, and that's usually the it's, I'm glad you said that, because usually by the time someone does get help, or they feel forced to, or they do, or they or it can be court ordered, I guess, sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's usually some kind of what we might call a rock bottom, or a bottoming out, where there's kind of nowhere else to go but
Mhm.
into recovery. Otherwise, it just keeps declining. Um, and I wanted to bring in, so Foxy Roxy says, I kind of wanted to talk about this. We're all addicts in some way, whether it be cigarettes, food, technology, shopping.
Mhm.
I guess, and I guess that is, she brings up a really good point, that some addictions are very, society accepts them, like shopping, right? We are told from the time we are young to be consumers and buy stuff. That's how the economy keeps
Yeah.
working in a
Mhm.
capitalistic society. So um, there may be more acceptable types um, of addiction, but addiction of any kind, what does it do to someone to be kind of in those restraints of addiction, whether it is, societally, society accepts it, or not so much.
Well, if society accepts it, that's one thing. But how about the people that are closest to you? How is it affecting them? And the way, say, your husband or wife, you're a shopping addict. Well, what happens to the finances in the household and all that? It creates a lot of conflict, and that's a good way to tell when something is out of control. If it's affecting other people and other things in your life, like your work,
Mm-hmm.
um, your love life, your finances, then it's getting out of hand.
Right.
It's a good way to sort of measure that. Is it becoming more important to you than almost anything else in your life? Are you willing to um, forego obligations to your family, to your work, to participate in this activity?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great way to decide for yourself if it's an issue. Um, why do you think that it can be so scary for people to just be their authentic self? Um, I know that we put on a lot of masks, for different social situations, and so what what do you think people are afraid of when they aren't honest or aren't authentic out in the world?
Judgment, I would say, is the number one thing. Um, they don't want other people to not approve of what they're doing, or there's all this pressure to keep up with the Joneses, and all the, like you mentioned, shopping, having the best of this or the newest of that.
Right.
And you know um, say you have this beautiful home, and you make beautiful dinners. Well, maybe you don't want people to know that your home was trashed, a week ago or something.
Right.
It isn't always this way, and
Right.
you have burned a few things in the kitchen trying these recipes and that kind of thing. And everybody seems to want to put up a good front. And what that does is make more hidden parts that people don't get to see.
And how do you think social media has contributed to people not living authentically, right? We see these
Oh
the
God.
couples that have the perfect posts and the people that are, they only put the good out, right? They don't want to talk about, like you said, the day I'm depressed, or the day the day I don't know what I'm doing with my life, or those kinds of moments. Even though everybody has those times, everybody has those things, everybody has bad things that happen, they
Yeah.
just want to present to the world this perfect picture. So how do you think that's contributed, and what does it do to other people, particularly young people who are experiencing, crappy stuff that happens? What do you think that does to people wanting to live authentically, or their ability to?
Well, it puts people in a box that they feel like they can't climb out of. If they climb out of the box and do something different that maybe they want to do, then they're going to be judged. And I think it makes us start collecting these kind of life cubes, if you will, like the shoulds and the oughtas and the gottas and the have tos
Mm-hmm.
that we pick up along the way. And if we don't do those things that we think we ought to do, should do, all that, then we start feeling other ways like guilty. Start feeling shame.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the kind of thing you don't want other people to see you feeling. So it becomes a bigger and bigger wall to climb over.
Right. And yeah, it's just, when so my parents are they were kind of they started their life together in the mid 50s, and very traditional marriage. And my dad was one of the first Silicon Valley generation, so they were kind of upwardly mobile. And with every promotion, we would get another car or a bigger house, and it was just kind of that. It was that 50s generation of consuming and getting a bigger and better whenever you made a step up. And I remember that my mom, as my husband was working, and we were both doing things, and we would have a promotion or something, she'd ask me, don't you want a bigger house? Don't you want a nicer house? Don't you want a bigger backyard for Cassie? Don't you want to? And I would get a bee in my bonnet about us moving. Maybe we should move. Maybe we should move. And it wasn't until later, I think Cassie was even in high school, that I realized that I like where we live, because we'd go look at other houses and we'd go look at other places. And I
Mm-hmm.
would be like, I actually like where we live. I like the location. I like the size. It's small, but I like it. I like that we're in the little community we're in. I just like it. But there was that pressure to see things a different way, and a way that I grew up with, right? So I have this idea of how life works, what you should do, and then asking myself, finally, do I think that? Do I really believe that? Is that me? Is that me living authentically, or is that me listening to someone else and doing what they want to do or what they would like me to do? So
Mm-hmm.
what kind of pressures do you find with your clients that have to do with parents or how they were raised? And how difficult is it to be your authentic self, even though it may push against all of the things you were taught growing up?
Well, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to be who you are. Family, in particular, there are so many expectations around, uh, from the day you're born. People have expectations about what you're going to be later on in life. How you're going to be in school and just everything that there's great expectations. And when you don't live up to those expectations, um, then, it's a whole different uh, feeling that you might get from your parents.
Right.
This feeling of disappointment, or, you're not good enough. And I think I'd love to see kids in high school, in junior high, just coming out and being whoever they want to be. I think it's fantastic. But being your authentic self around your family can be very challenging because there's so much judgment and so much baggage that goes along
Right.
with being in a family to start with.
Right. And I found it in just that small situation, I found that then I had to say, every time my mom would say, don't you want a bigger house? I would have to say, you know what? I've thought about it and I really like it here. And I don't think we're going to be moving. I like it here. So there's this, and there is a type of power you're taking back, right? When you declare that, no, this is the way that I feel. And it ends up being not as big a deal as you think it would.
Yeah.
It's a it's more the struggle takes place internally, really, and not externally, and once you've made that decision, no, this is how I feel, this is how I am, or this is how I'm going to conduct myself now. It may not be the big deal you think it is. It may be, like you said, there may be judgment at first, or there may be questions at first, but it also may be that freedom of expression, letting yourself be
Mm-hmm.
who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that has value to it, right?
Yes, I think every human being wants freedom. I think innately we have that within us.
Right.
We want to be free, and it's so hard to really be that way and meet societal expectations and family expectations. But I
Right.
think one of the important things that I've found is that um, responsibility and freedom go hand in hand.
I think that is so true.
And so, when you talk about freedom being, say, something that the alcoholic might start, say, drinking, and they might get that feeling of being free,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, uh, substance you might choose. But really, that's not true freedom. That often leads to more bondage than freedom.
Right. Right. I wanted to bring in a comment here by David. Um, Too many of my blood family is so toxic. My chosen family loves and supports for more than my blood family ever has. So when do you know it's time to, because we talked about when we start to know something is an addiction, is when it starts to affect the people around us and affect us in a way that gets out of hand. But how do we know when uh, being our authentic self means moving away from people that um, maybe don't accept it, or have just always been a certain way and you don't want to be that way anymore? So when do we know it's a good idea to kind of separate ourselves even from blood family?
Well, I don't know that we really have to separate ourselves as much as we have to learn to take full responsibility for how we feel. Because when we let other people's behaviors affect us in that way, affect us negatively, then that's on us.
Right.
And so I understand David as saying, his family is very toxic to be around. and I don't question that a bit. But he would be better served by, owning his feelings and just examining them and, uh, taking ownership of them and say, well, this is just how it is. And I can't do anything to change them, but I can take ownership for my own happiness.
Right. I understand that because I think that anything like that, especially if you're wanting to, like you said, take responsibility for yourself and maybe have some inner growth yourself, being able to be around people and that don't agree with you, or they live a completely different way, using it as your spiritual practice, using it as a way to improve yourself, and at the same time let them be who they are and not letting it affect you. That is a great spiritual practice, right?
Yes, and um, it's amazing if you detach from that dynamic of toxicity, where you have this sort of string attached to each person in the family, and y'all play this little game back and forth. If you just sort of focus on me and what I need to do for my spiritual growth, and start working on that, and let the pieces fall where they may, then there's like a detachment that happens that allow for change in that relationship as well. I think that's how Al-Anon works.
Right. Right. And because once you're in that observer position, completely aware, rather than letting things wash over you and thinking about the past and having everything come at you, when you can let go of all that and sort of be just present and in that observer position, that kind of seeing people for who and what they are, you're right. There's a detachment that happens, and it's actually very freeing, to know you can be in the same place with toxic people and they can't affect you unless you allow them to.
Yes, yes. And that's real freedom.
Absolutely, because you're going to find yourself in positions like that, and that's why I say it's a practice, because
Mm-hmm.
it can help you to build those muscles to be able to do that in any situation where you can pull back from it, see it for what it is, and not having your ego kind of come in and take things personally and drudge up the past and bring up grievances and all of those things that can happen when you're with people that you would consider toxic or were toxic growing up. When you can be free of all that and just be and be present, you're right. It is ultimate freedom.
And it's certainly not an easy thing to do.
No.
It's a, I, it, in recovery, we have to look at the resentments and all that we have, and the and figure out what our part in all that was. And that's the key to letting go of the things that are bound to us, is to examine what role we play,
Mm-hmm.
and make corrections to that if we can, but own it. This is not all a one-sided
Right.
thing.
Right. And you can go the route. I mean, David, because he's talking about, a long time ago, I vowed to keep my home as free as possible from negativity. Folks always comment on how comfortable they feel in my home. It's validation. And I think that is also taking responsibility, right? But
Yeah.
we're talking about is when you find yourself because you will have to be around negative people, whether it's just someone sitting next to you on an airplane, and
Mm-hmm.
having you don't have to, but using your own situation as a spiritual practice rather than just I'm not dealing with this anymore. That's also a choice you can make to kind of have it help you to strengthen that authentic part of you that you want to express. It can
Mm-hmm.
be a practice, right?
Yeah, and the ultimate goal is to not have those feelings within you.
Right.
To free yourself of those feelings when you think of someone that's toxic in your life, that feeling of you don't want to have to feel that. That doesn't feel good.
Right. And ultimately, I mean, you're the one who has to live with you, right? So your opinion or your how you conduct yourself and live your life, you're right, taking responsibility for it, but then living that way, there's there's a level of responsibility you take because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So there will be sometimes there may be fallout from living the way you want to live. If if it's your sexual orientation and you come out as gay, there may be fallout from that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but like you said, that's not you. That's how they are reacting. That's how they're responding. Um, but taking that responsibility is also accepting the consequences of living authentically. That there may be reaction to it. That like you said, there may be reaction to it, but
Mm-hmm.
that uh, you don't have to let it affect you.
And
That's
that's
the problem.
I realize that's so much easier said than done. Oh my
Yes.
God. And whatever you can get, however however you choose to deal with it,
Mm-hmm.
if it makes you feel better doing it that way, that's what's important as well.
Right.
That's a
And
step along the path
right.
to
And
really.
so Donnell says this hurts to hear. Telling abused folks to stick around their abusers is like telling those who are breathing poison to ignore the cough. Yes. So Donnell, we're not saying to be around your abusers. That's what we're saying.
No.
We're just talking about people that maybe have a difference of opinion than you in your family. People that, maybe they have drama going on in their life. When you can learn to separate from that and kind of uh, realize that that's their thing, that's their stuff, and it doesn't have to affect you. That's more what we're talking about. We're not really talking about
Mm.
trauma. That's a different. And so, but I'm glad you brought that up. So it gives me a chance to say that's not really what we're saying. Um,
Not at all.
yeah. So that and that's a whole other thing, because trauma is its own journey as well, just like addiction is, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Um, I wanted to go back to, I had a question here about, I can't find it, but somebody who grew up, oh, here it is. Um, Andy grew up Orthodox Mormon in Utah. The patriarchy is awful. So so talk about living authentically when it comes to your spiritual path. First of all, how important it is, but also, when you've grown up in a religion from the time you were tiny. Yeah, talk about that a little bit, Georgia.
Well, but most religions, it seems, or many religions, I shouldn't say, but I think they all have a certain path that they to God, let's say. It might be the Ten Commandments for
Mhm.
Christians. I'm not sure about Mormons, but a lot of times these objectives are very hard to live up to. And so um, I feel like taking that inner journey or getting to the place where you're aware that there is an inner journey to take, that what you feel within you matters, that sense of uh, guidance within you that nudges you one way or the other. That's
Right.
something valid that you can listen to or learn to listen to and learn to discern. So when you grow up in a like a patriarchy, like she's talking about in the Mormon faith, I think it's there's enough. It sounds like Roxy has found enough um, disagreement within her at what she was presented that she's probably known for a while, Roxy, right? That this is not something for you. But then what do you do?
Right. And it was, yeah. Um, right. I can't find it. Oh, it was Andy. But yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And she was responding to Foxy Roxy, so I know it was confusing.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, exactly. And I left the Mormon Church in 2008, and I had, like you said, I had kind of a 1 foot in, 1 foot out for a very long time, and it was their involvement in not supporting gay marriage that kind of tipped me over the edge, and it was a process, and again, it was asking those internal questions of, what do I believe? Because I've been in the church my whole life. What do I think? What do I believe? And that kind of set me. That's why I'm sitting here today, because it set me on this quest to find out, to understand what resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know, because I've been the indoctrination when it starts when you're a kid, and and a lot of the, for the Mormon faith, there is a lot of good things. There's a big heavy emphasis on service, and there is an emphasis on being kind and loving one another, and those kinds of things are really good. Mm-hmm. But then there's other things about the actual belief, or like you said, kind of the structure that never rang true to me. And so, is that when you're figuring out your authentic self, is it important to ask those internal questions? Because I don't think, if you're raised in a religion, sometimes you don't even stop to think, do I really believe that? Because it's just the way it is, right? So how important are those internal questions you ask yourself, and how often should you be asking yourself those internal questions? What do I think? Do I really believe that kind of thing?
I think it's really hard, uh, like you were saying, when you grow up in a religion and things are just the way they are. Um, and that's just it. That's what you're supposed to believe. But at some point along the way, when it starts feeling um, um, it doesn't resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
The older you get, the less it resonates. I like that word, and I think it's always a good thing to ask yourself those questions. But even asking those questions of yourself can feel like you're somehow sinning or somehow um, doing something wrong when you've grown up in a organized religion. Do you think so?
It's that added added pressure, like you said, or it's having to live up to something what
Yeah.
was expected of you. So, and then you have the added fear factor, right?
Oh, for
God's
sure.
going to be mad at me, or, those kinds of things, right?
Yes, and it happens. People shun you. They will shun you. Um, People in your own family will shun you if you sort of want to go off over here.
Right.
Um, and I know for in my case, and I think in many cases, once you get to a certain age of development, and maybe you do some things that you've been told will send you to hell,
Right.
like smoking cigarettes or something. You'll go to hell if you, whatever it might be, even worse. Then it's sort of like, well, okay, well, what do I do now? I'm doomed, right?
Right.
So I think uh, getting on a spiritual path of your own is certainly a challenge. But I think if you're feeling that way about um, where you are, then look for something you're really curious about, something that sparks your interest. Whether it be, it doesn't really matter. It's something that sparks your interest, and follow that curiosity and see where it leads you.
That is so important, because I think that is the key, right? That's that little part of you there's something there, or there's something I need to figure out with this. And you're right. That
Hmm.
curiosity is exactly what led me to read the certain books that I read, or certain things that I would hear about, and then I'd go and kind of chase that. I remember one thing that really, really resonated with me once I started to really ponder it and think about it was reincarnation. It's not a part of the Mormon church. There's a pre-existence in the Mormon church, but there's not reincarnation. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, of course that is the way it is. At least for me, it was like an epiphany. It's like, of course that is the way it is, because how could you possibly learn everything you need to learn in one lifetime from one perspective? Of course there is. Um, so yeah, so that was something that right away it was like it kind of divided me from the beliefs that I was raised with, and I realized that resonates with me so much more than just you get one go around and good luck with that,
Yeah. Yes. Some of us have a lot to learn.
Right, exactly. And I love I remember reading um the idea that or it was put this way, and that this is what resonated with me, was the idea that you learn from all sides. So
Hmm.
if you were a caretaker in one life, you might be sick in another and being taken care of, so you can understand fully the idea of being taken care of, and and taking care of someone. It's you get a full rounded experience, and you learn from all sides. And that's the only way you can fully understand something, is by walking through it, actually living it. Otherwise it's a secondhand experience, or it's a secondhand understanding, and it's not a full understanding, right? Is that the way you think of it too?
Absolutely, yes. And all of these progressions that we make lead us to that authentic self.
Right. Right.
We learn along the way, how can we be more authentic?
Right.
We learn different pieces of us and what's important to us. And I know for me, um, I needed more than the traditional, uh, steps in AA. I needed to find out. I was told, um, well, you don't have to understand, just do. But I needed to understand,
Right.
and I think that's true of so many of us, especially. Uh, when we're going through this huge paradigm shift that seems to be happening in the
Right.
world. We,
Right.
I
Go
think
ahead.
more of us are just led down that path, led to discover the truth,
Right.
what's true for us, and what resonates as true out in the world.
And I want to ask you too about people pleasing, um, because that can also be it can divert our path from being authentically ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I guess it goes down to, or comes down to, people worrying about what people will think of you, say about you. This people pleasing that's a huge one for me. And again, I think it goes back to my being in the church and trying to be good and trying to adhere to everything expected of me. And um, so, how can people get past people pleasing to be their authentic self?
Oh, that's a challenge for sure.
Tell me about it.
Well, I think that's a boundary issue
Right,
and an issue of self care. Because if you're people pleasing, uh, you're not really taking care of when does your turn come?
right,
So
right,
many people do so many things, and it's also a great cause of resentment when you do things for other people, hoping to please them. I mean, I would hope to maybe they would do the same thing for me if it was needed, but that often doesn't happen that way. So we're continually frustrated.
that is such a great point about that is such a great point, that it actually ends up doing the thing you're trying to avoid, which is build up resentment. It can build resentment in you. It can
Mhm.
build, and you're so trying to avoid any kind of conflict or disappointment, and it can actually bring that stuff up within you. That's such a good point.
Um, yeah, it has the opposite effect most of the time. We do unto others, hoping they'll do unto us, but often, it's not that way because
Right,
we're doing something that really other people we wouldn't expect them to do.
right,
Going the extra mile, like taking someone to the doctor every week for a year. How many people would do that for us? I mean, most people would say, well, I can do it this week, but not next, or
right,
you know, setting some kind of boundary so
right.
that they can still have their own life and their own um, self care. Taking care of other people can be um, a real depressive thing to go through.
Right. And it leads to, when you are in a position where, like you said, you have to set boundaries and say no, or set boundaries and say not this time but next time. That can lead to, for people that are people pleasers, that can lead to feelings of guilt. You feel guilty. You feel, that it can be a real, wheel that you get on of, trying to kind of adhere, but then also having to deal with the guilt that comes with that. So maybe next time you think, I'll just do it because it's better than dealing with the guilt I feel it when I say no. And that puts you on this weird treadmill, right? Where you're not really being authentically you. You're not doing things with a in a with a cheerful heart or a happy heart. So you're putting that energy into it, that kind of, oh, I guess I will if I have to. So it's like nobody really wins when that.
No, the people you're helping often get resentful at you.
Right, right.
So it's a no-win situation.
Exactly. And how do you, I'm sure there's a whole therapy around it, but how do you have a practice that people can do to get rid of that guilt voice, or that voice in your head that tells you you're not a good person if you don't, if you don't do everything all the time for everybody, you're not being a good person, or the guilt that comes with saying no when you're a people pleaser.
Well, the key thing is to sort of uh, redirect uh, the thought process back to you and what do you want in life.
Right.
Because people pleasers are so focused on pleasing everybody else around them and hoping that that's going to give them pleasure. That's going to give them some kind of reward.
Right.
But often it does not do anything near that. It just makes you feel bad about yourself. It makes you feel used. It creates a lot of resentment. So,
Right.
what I try to do is um, direct people back to what it was in life that they wanted to do. What were they attracted to?
Mm-hmm.
What were they curious about? What are they curious about now?
Right.
Because I do think those are indicators of not only um, uh, ways to get yourself back on the right path,
Right.
but I think they're indicators of purposeful living. When I have a great uh, description of how to find your life purpose. It's find something you would do whether anyone paid you to do it or not, and that is your purpose. Because the people pleaser is kind of just the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to find purpose in helping everybody else,
Right.
but for them, they're it's all external. Where are they inside? What does their inner being have to say to them? Let's find out what that might be.
And that's it. Those are such powerful questions. And I think that, like you said, we don't sometimes when we get on that treadmill, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and going into the ways, well, I was raised that way, or I always thought that way, being able to stop and ask yourself those questions to break that, um, the tendency to just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, it can be transformative, right? It can be life changing. And Georgia, I wanted to ask you about, because you wanted to kind of talk about some evidence based healing that has become very interesting to you, and I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, evidence-based healing is goes further to me than just your evidence-based therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a therapist, and I operate like most any other therapist, um, but with the addition of uh, having some spiritual awareness and some experience on uh, how to navigate some of these life issues, from my own perspective as well.
Right.
And so I like to call it healing because it's really meant to be a spiritual, to address spiritual maladies
Mm.
and spiritual imbalances. And we might not even know that could be what it is, but
Right.
um, I think that's the key Not everybody is even aware they have a spirit. I know your viewers are, of course.
Yeah.
That's what I want to help people to do. This is a perfect topic for me. I have a website called The Spirit of Therapy. And the reason I named it that was because the spirit part means the essence. I want people to be able to become who they really are, who they were born to be. And so when I work with people, that's the goal I have in mind. Um, it just for them, and so we work with where they are at this point in time. But that's what I've always felt I wanted to do with my practice was to help people heal on a spiritual level.
I
Does
love
that?
that. And I'm sure that part of that has to do with peeling back all of these layers that get put on you, the family expectations and the maybe the cultural expectations, religious expectations. You know, I would imagine that because we really do get weighed down as we go through life, even with labels, you're the shy one, you're the shy one. Those kinds of things are really, they're like heavy coats that you have to take off to get to that essence, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought of a kind of interesting analogy uh, this week where we all kind of want a full glass of sunshine of the spirit, but we have these little life cubes that dilute the process, the 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 good stuff, all the shoulds, all the have tos, the expectations, all the trauma that has happened that we need to examine and heal from. Just all the life stuff that gets in the way of us becoming our authentic selves.
And you also, because of the question earlier, you also deal with a lot of people who have dealt with trauma, right?
Yes, many, many, well, many women alcoholics in particular. I did a survey one time myself at a treatment facility, and 67% of the women had experienced some form of sexual abuse,
Mm.
and even higher, just verbal abuse. Or so there's a lot of really deep traumatic things that happen to people, and it's so hard to examine that
Right.
honestly. And again, it's hard. We can't be responsible for the trauma that happened to us, but we do have to take some ownership of what we do with it now.
Right. Right. And I can appreciate that because it wasn't something you asked for, but it's like you said, you have it. And so what do you, how can you deal with it, and how can you kind of um, take your power back after something like that,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, and isn't that what all being authentic is? Is being self-empowered, self-determined, self-directed.
Um, Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for the work you do, because it's so needed and so important right now. These healing journeys that people are on, these spiritual journeys that people are on, um, and and I can imagine how I can imagine how um, wonderful you are to talk to about things like this, because you are so calm. There's a practical nature about you. There's and you really and there's also this non-judgment factor that I think is so important when people come in with things that maybe they do not feel good about, they feel ashamed about, guilty about, upset, has caused upset in their life. And so I just really appreciate the spirit with which you do what you do.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for having me on your show.
You're welcome. And I put all of George's information down into the other one. Thank you, Lynn. The description, but can you tell, I know you have a special that you would like to offer this particular audience. So do you want to tell them?
Oh, yes. I have a December special where I'm offering 30 minutes of whatever you want to do for $25 for the month of December. And there's a direct link to book a session in the description along with the website link. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's it's in the description. And the one reason that I wanted to do this show now about authenticity, becoming your authentic self, being your authentic self, is because we're right around the corner from a new year. And I think that, and the fact you're offering this in December, I think is so great, because I think that that's the time we start thinking about making transformations in our life, making things different. And I think it's a great, it's a great way, I think, to start the new year, is kind of with the idea that you're going to just be who you really are. Right.
What a relief.
Yeah, what a relief. Exactly. It does.
It's a great relief not to have to, create another you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There is, you're right. There is a relief in that, and it's not as stressful. You can be really, having to put on a mask for every different person or situation is very, very exhausting and stressful. And I think you're right. When you can just be like, I'm just going to be who I am, what I am, it can really, really help resolve stress in your life. And also, like you said, it can be such a relief.
Yes. Just to be who you are, and understand that you have the power within you to create the life you really want to lead. It's such a powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Georgia. And we will talk again next Sunday. Thanks so much for hanging out, and have a great rest of your day.
Love y'all.